Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Thank you for inviting me. It feels like a real privilege to be here today. I've been very impressed with everyone's violent note-taking throughout the morning, and the interesting bits of my talk should all be on my blog, scheduled to be on for tomorrow, so you can save you the writing after your lunch. I guess the reason I'm here is because I had a hunch about a year or so ago that I could make or I should try at least, to make a career out of doing what I love. I had this hunch that if you are willing to do something with relentless passion and enthusiasm, and if you care enough about it and you're willing to work hard enough at it, then you can make it your living of it. So I decided I was going to try and make my living out of doing what I love doing, which is challenging expeditions in the world's wild places and trying to write books about them and speaking mainly to kids to try and encourage them to achieve whatever it is that they want to achieve. But all of this really came about, well, I don't really know how it came about, but somehow I summoned up the energy and the nerve to set myself an outrageous goal, and then the hardest part, which I don't know how I did, was to have the nerve to actually begin it. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I got to the end of university and I wanted to set myself a challenge that I was probably going to fail. And that sounds a bit ridiculous, but I figured that the only way I'd know what I was capable of achieving was by setting myself something that was beyond what I could achieve. And so although I might fail, that didn't matter. Along the way I would find out what I could achieve. So I came up with this idea to try to cycle all the way around the world. I wasn't sure I could do it. I wasn't sure how long it would take. But I said goodbye to my friends and family. I split up with my girlfriend and, feeling pretty sorry for myself, got on my bike and set off. That's not funny. I set off to try to cycle around the world. Yeah. So I set off from home and I cycled around the world. I cycled 46,000 miles, and while I was going around the world I thought I should probably do the job properly, so I rode the length of the 3 great land masses as well. So in the process of getting around the world I rode 46,000 miles through 60 countries and 5 continents, which almost took me far enough in distance to have gone right the way around the world twice, which is probably a bit silly of me, but I hope you'll agree the whole thing was a little bit silly. So I set off from home, I pedalled across Europe on my way towards Australia. Those of you with Geography GCSE will see I didn't get anywhere near Australia. A couple of weeks into my ride, the September 11th attacks happened in America. My whole plans went out the window, and suddenly my carefully planned scenic route through Afghanistan no longer seemed like such a fun idea. So from Istanbul I found myself, instead of carrying straight on to Australia, turning right instead and heading to Africa. So I pedalled down through Africa, through the stone-throwing hordes of Ethiopia, all the way down to Cape Town, crossed over to South America, and then rode right from the very bottom of South America, Ushuaia, the most southerly town in the planet, on Tierra del Fuego, southern Patagonia. From there I rode up to northern Alaska. Logistically that's pretty easy to do. All you do is you keep the sea on your left-hand side, you keep pedalling, and about a year and a half later you'll arrive in Alaska. From there I crossed over to Asia and over to Siberia, and I thought if I was going to go to Siberia I should probably do the job properly, so I arrived there in winter. I spent 3 months cycling through Siberia in the winter, which was about as much fun as it sounds. Down Japan, over to China, quick dash across China, back across Central Asia and Europe, and back home to England, back home for a nice cup of tea. And the next project that I'm working towards is an expedition to the South Pole with a good friend of mine, Ben Saunders. And what we're trying to do is walk from the edge of Antarctica to the South Pole and then all the way back to the edge of Antarctica. It sounds a bit pointless when you say it like that. Basically, we're trying to do what Captain Scott died doing. Hopefully we won't die. But I think this is interesting because a few years ago, if someone had said to me, do you want to go walk to the South Pole? I would have thought, no way, that's not for me. I'm not an athlete, I'm not a Superman, I'm just a very normal bloke. But I now really believe that I can do it. And the plan that we're trying to do, if some of you have probably seen Ben Fogle and James Cracknell recently on TV, Olympic Adonis, this sort of massive man reduced to a blubbering shell, we're trying to walk 1,500 miles further than they did and to be on the ice for 100 days longer than they were. And having seen this double Olympic gold medalist broken, I'm now a bit worried about it. But this is what I've set myself to do. So it's not a great picture, it's a big moment. My bike, the cliffs of Dover, my journey around the world had begun. I only had £7 grand. I thought £7,000 is not enough to cycle around the world, but You can't let something as boring as money get in the way of the biggest ambition of your life. So off I went, crying my eyes out, thinking, oh, what am I doing? And down to Dover, and I was on my way. And I think in many ways, the most important part of my journey was already over at this point, because I'd gone from someone who was talking about doing a big expedition to someone who was actually doing it. I'd taken that crucial first step, and I was on my way. Now, there was always something I was getting worried about on the trip, and I always sort of felt that I was verging on being out of my depth. And I was very worried about cycling through Sudan, because I knew there's a massive desert there. I'd never been to a desert. I'd certainly never cycled across one, and I just kept thinking, oh, what would it be like? What would it be like? Well, one day I had to find out, because the road ended and the desert began. So this is officially the end of the road. And this then took me for the next 3 weeks pedaling through this desert. It's the hottest I'd ever been, cycling through a desert for 3 weeks. I didn't wash or shower, I changed my clothes, I was dirty and stinking. Don't worry, I had a shower today. But I loved it, because this really started to feel like the adventure that I left home for. And it was a great reminder for me that although I'd been very nervous to begin it, once I was in this situation, I was not only surviving, I was actually thriving, having the time of my life. A few years later, I was still pedaling, and I was up in the Yukon where massive forest fires closed the road. And the police said, sorry, this road is going to be closed for weeks and weeks. And that was the perfect get out of jail card for me. It was someone saying, sorry, you can't do it. It's your excuse to give up what you're trying to do and jump on a bus and drive round with your honour intact. And it's like a get out of jail card, really. But one thing that I've really tried to become aware of is this... is to be really honest with myself in terms of believing my own excuses. And although it would have been very nice to say, oh, Mr. Policeman said I can't do it, I'll go on a nice bus and it'll be easy and it's not my fault, I really come to try to think of whether I'm being honest and listening to my own excuses. So rather than jumping on the bus, I thought, I can't go by bike, what can I do? I know, I'll borrow a canoe. So I borrowed a canoe, put my bike into this canoe. I found a moose skull. Someone had told me that moose skulls are very lucky, so I lashed on a moose skull and set off paddling down the Yukon River for 500 miles. Until I was past the fires. The Canadians don't have a very high impression of English. They think we're all a bit feeble and wimpish, and they said, you're English, you can't canoe, you'll definitely capsize, you'll definitely die. Red rag to a bull, so I set off, and I didn't know what I was doing, so I did capsize, but luckily didn't die. And again, this is another example of the reward that comes when if you don't listen to your own excuses and you actually force yourself to carry on, really. But if you set yourself difficult challenges, then inevitably there are going to be some hard times along the way. And what I tried to do on this trip was to accept that there were going to be good times, and all this is easier said than done, to accept that there are going to be bad times, and not only to accept them, but to almost embrace them and think, man, this is hard, this is miserable, this is horrible. If it wasn't hard, miserable and horrible, everyone was doing it. Therefore, I'm earning the good times. And the ultimate example of miserable times, I think, was when I cycled through Siberia. Being on such a budget, my kit was rubbish. I had a $50 tent, which had a big hole in it. Instead of ski goggles, I had some lawnmower safety specs, the ones you get free with a lawnmower. And sleeping in a tent at minus 40 with a big hole in the front of it is pretty miserable. I think something that I'm really glad I've learnt, I don't really know how I have, is to not really fear failing anymore. It sounds ridiculous if you articulate it that you're not going to begin something because you might fail. How are you going to know you're going to fail unless you start it? So my theory on the things I try and do now is I'm just going to start them. I'm going to start them. I might fail. That doesn't really matter. I'll just start something else. What does matter is you don't want to get old. You don't want to be 32. Look back on your life and think, man, I wish I'd done X, Y, and Z. So when I got to the end of Africa, my first continent, I thought, well, I'll probably just jump on a plane across the ocean. Then I thought, no, going on a plane, that's so boring. I'll try and hitch a lift on a boat. So it took me 2 months in Cape Town to find a boat. And I was thinking, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. But eventually, I did find a yacht. I hitchhiked a lift on this yacht, crossed the Atlantic on that. 24 days of fantastic adventure. And so worth putting myself out there to try and do this. You might be able to spot me. I'm the English guy with no suntan, even after a whole year in Africa. Yeah. I think the best example that I've got really of exposing myself to potential failure and to potential humiliation is when I sat down to write a book. Writing a book is hard. It's very hard. It's even harder though is to be published, especially these days. If you're not a celebrity, you're not carrying a fridge with you, some sort of novelty thing. You're not breaking a Guinness World Record. If you're just a normal bloke doing something interesting, nobody's very interested. So everyone rejected my book, and it was all rubbish and depressing. And I was about to give up on it all until a good man, Paul Deegan, he encouraged me to self-publish my book, to publish it myself. And I was very worried about doing this because it had been rejected by all the proper publishers. How embarrassing not to get the hint and then go on and self-publish your book and for it to be completely rubbish even once you've done that. So I realised I was really exposing myself. I was going to be very, very vulnerable here doing this. But I decided to do it, and I'm now a massive evangelist for print-on-demand technology, especially for people like me, normal people, not famous people, but with a mildly interesting story. And it's so easy to do. You can get your book done for free this afternoon. All you do, you write a book, you upload it like an attachment, you make a nice pretty picture on PowerPoint or whatever you can do, and you attach that and you press go, zoof, off it goes through the internet, and it's there. It's a book. It's on Amazon. It's as easy as that. If you want, you could change the cover on your book. You could change the cover of your book every single week if you wanted to. If you're writing a novel, you could put a different ending to your novel every single week. The potential of this, I think, for the future of old media, what future there is left of it, I think this is definitely it. I'm a huge evangelist for this. Man, these were meant to go automatically. I'm getting tired clicking them. So, not only then did I do this one book, on the back of it, by taking this risk, I've now got 3 books done. I'm not saying this as a blatantly shameless self-promotion plug. They're not exactly Hemingway-esque. But just because of the reward this gave me by putting myself on the line and going for it, really. So, last year I decided to run the Marathon des Sables, a marathon in the Sahara Desert. Running a marathon is quite hard. This race in the Sahara, so it's a bit harder, but you have to run, I think, 6 marathons in 6 days, carrying all your food, all your kit. It's pretty hot, it's pretty hard work. It's 50 degrees, it's really hard work. And you can imagine this sort of blisters you get, pretty unpleasant. We've already had some foot stories this morning, so it would be very unprofessional of me, especially after a nice lunch, to show you pictures like this of my feet. Unfortunately, penultimate day of the race, I broke my foot. Sound familiar? I broke my foot, and I thought, right, this is a great excuse to get out of this with honour. But by now, I had such a memory bank of miserable experiences from my cycling that I now knew that I was capable of enduring these bad times, and not only enduring them, but appreciating that getting to the end would be so much sweeter if I could do it. So I employed my mind of a goldfish mentality, which means you run to the top of the next sand dune, you look around, say, oh, this is a pretty view, run to the top of the next sand dune, look around, enjoy the view, run to the top of the next sand dune, and if you do that long enough, you'll get to the end, you'll get your tacky plastic finisher's medal, which is worth so much more than a tacky plastic finisher's medal. Earlier this year, I was very privileged to get to meet a guy called Phil Packer, Major Phil Packer. He's a soldier in the British Army who was unfortunately paralysed in Iraq last year. And the doctor said to him, sorry, you'll never walk again. Imagine hearing that, sorry, you'll never walk again. He said, no, I will walk again, and in the process, I'm going to raise £1 million for Help for Heroes, this charity that supports injured servicemen. And I came across him, so I sent him an email saying, I think what you're doing is pretty cool, let me know if I can help in any way. He wrote back an email to me saying, thanks for your email, how about we row to France together? And I thought, that is not what I was intending. I cannot row, and I get really seasick, and this sounds like a rubbish idea. So I wrote back and said, okay, let's do it. It's a case of coming up with some stupid idea, committing yourself to it, and then just taking the necessary steps towards achieving it. It's not really that big a deal. Just before we started, though, I discovered a large hole in the bottom of the boat, and that was a bit of a problem, because I thought, oh, what can I do? What am I going to do? There's a hole in the boat. I don't want to tell Phil, because if I tell him, then we won't go, and now I really want to do this now. But then I thought, I can't set out to sea with a paralysed guy in a boat with a hole in it. My mum will never forgive me. So I told him, Phil, we've got a hole in the boat. And he said, oh, well, never mind. And off we went. Luckily, Luckily, we didn't sink. We set off midnight on Valentine's Day, very romantic, the two of us, rowing out of Dover harbour, out the ferry thing, and we'd never been at sea in the boat before. So we rowed out the harbour, it was dark and big walls and the ferries, and when you get out, it felt like the South Atlantic. It was massive waves, it was freezing cold, I was seasick the whole way across, and it was a truly miserable experience. But Phil has since gone on. You might have seen him on television doing the London Marathon. He walked it on crutches a mile or two a day. It took him about 2 weeks, and he's now walking. He's made his money, and I felt so privileged to have come across this guy with such a positive attitude of just get on and do it. No mucking about, just do it. Stop whinging and just do it. So I've been living in London for a couple of years. I love living in London, except that after a while you start to get flabby. And there are three kinds of flabbiness. Living in London too long, you start to get physically flabby, you get a bit lazy, you eat Chinese takeaways, and it's all very nice, but you start to get a bit flabby. You get mentally flabby, you start to think, oh, I can't be bothered to do anything, I'll just watch TV. And worst of all, you get morally flabby. Moral flabbiness is the worst of the three. You start to think, oh, this is my life, oh, I'll accept it, this will do, and you just start to deteriorate towards mediocrity until you get the rage and you think, what am I doing with my life? I've got to get out of here. So I jumped on a plane and I flew to India. Now, Wikipedia, I found on Wikipedia this river, southern India, the holiest river of southern India, called the Kaveri River. And I thought, I know, I'll walk the length of the Kaveri River from the mouth up to the source. And I deliberately didn't do any more research than that. I jumped on a plane, I flew out to India, I got to the mouth of this river, and I started walking up the Kaveri River towards the source. Now, the reason I did this is a couple of reasons. I wanted to put myself into a situation where I had no idea what was coming along, partly because I enjoyed the curiosity that instills in you, but also because I was testing myself. This was me thinking, okay, am I going to back myself to cope in whatever comes along in this walk up this river across India? Another thing I enjoyed about the walk was just the massive simplification of my life, the cutting away of all of the junk. Travelling by bike, that's pretty simple, but with a rucksack on and walking, that was so simple and pure, and I really, really enjoyed the challenge of that. But I think that really, though, adventure is not necessarily about flying off to the Amazon or wherever. Adventure is really just about an attitude, and I've come to feel for myself that an adventure really is just putting yourself slightly out of your comfort zone, whether that's physically or mentally or culturally, in whatever floats your boat, really. And therefore, if that's the case, then you can have an adventure wherever you are. And so, about the last year or so, I've been thinking more about the concept of micro adventures, very, very small adventures, which are like a distilled. Bless you. They're like a distilled embodiment of a huge, huge expedition. A small little thing that still gives you many of the benefits of a huge expedition. Because all you need really, just need to be in the right attitude. So last year, I thought instead of going by car from London to family's house for Christmas, I thought, I know, I'll walk home for Christmas. So this is my flat in London at about 5 o'clock in the morning, a few days before Christmas. Everyone else very sensibly asleep, and I set off to walk to Kent. And it wasn't a particularly nice walk. I walked through Peckham and Lewisham and all these well, no, there's some parts that are very nice in Peckham. Yeah. I was just about to talk about that before you rudely interrupted me. So this was a journey I'd done so many times, mostly by car, sitting in traffic, grumbling away. But when you walk, suddenly it's a physical challenge. You're going so slowly, your eyes open, you see things in a new concept. And even walking home, crossing over the M25, it was all about just learning new experiences and just seeing a different perspective on familiar things. So I'm now a huge advocate for micro adventures. And of course, getting to the end of something like that means that you've really earned your Christmas dinner. So you always have to remember the sweet reward at the end of it. You earn your Christmas dinner. Now, I'm very well aware that most people have zero desire to fly off and cycle through Siberia, or you don't have the time, you're busy with your work, whatever that is. But that's really not what I'm here for. I'm not encouraging you all to quit your jobs and fly off to the empty quarter and saddle up your camel. I'd rather you didn't. It's crowded enough already. So really all of that I've just been talking about is just a metaphor really for statements of intent for life. And now that I'm back home in the real world, what I try to do is I try and turn the lessons that I learned on some of my adventures towards just getting on with normal life and doing normal life to the best of my ability, making the most of my days. So I'm going to end really with just a few statements of intent, and these are a few things I've started doing in my life. Some of them have a sort of practical value towards what I do. Others are just about getting me in the right frame of mind for my day in order to get on with my day. Now, time surely is the most precious thing for most of us here. So valuable, and we would all love to have more. I found out that if you get up 10 minutes earlier and you go to bed 10 minutes later, not a big deal, you get 5 extra days a year. How amazing is that? 5 days for free, which works out to almost an extra free year of life. So this is my first thing I've started doing. Get up 10 minutes earlier, you get 5 extra days. Now, good bit of advice. I've started to shower regularly, and I find this helps me a lot in life. Now, what I've started doing now is I've started having cold showers every morning, and this, you might start to think I'm a bit weird now, but not only is it environmentally friendly and cheap, but having a cold shower, I think, is like a metaphor for everything I try to do, really. Before you get in, you think, oh, this is really bad, this is really awful, and then when you get in, it's a little bit bad, but not that bad, and then when you get out, you're sort of bouncingly smug and woo! And so I can highly recommend cold showers. Or jumping in a river. There must be a river. I'm going to go jump in a river tomorrow morning if anyone wants to join me. Now, one thing I've started to do is I've started to take a photo every day. It's my New Year's resolution for this year. And I did this because I want to get better at photography, but through doing it, I've come to learn that it's actually about more than photography. What it is, for me now, it's this daily little dose of self-discipline. Every day, I have to do this little thing. And more than that, every day, however boring and rubbish my day, every day I have to find something interesting or beautiful. Wherever I am, I have to think, right, there must be something interesting or beautiful around here. And it's about sort of getting myself into the right sort of frame of mind for that. And so, on that note, here you are. Photo of the day. Smile. Oh, come on, it's a bit dark in it. Right, oh man. You see, I need to learn my camera. So, photo of the day. Now, I'm quite hyperactive, so I do a lot of running around and stuff like that. But I've come to think that running or cycling or whatever you do is not really just about the sort of fitness side. For me, it's about just feeling fresh and taking a little pause out of my day to just sort of run and just to be. So now, rather than taking the tube or something to meetings, I tend to run to them armed with a spare shirt and a can of deodorant. And so I think, I know a lot of people don't want to run, but if you drive to work, park a mile earlier and walk to work. If you go on the tube, get off a stop earlier and walk. And I just love this forced bit of slowing down in my life. This has been great for me. I've started to challenge myself to turn my TV off for a day and then to turn it off for a week, and then suddenly you get so much more time with which to read more books, which is something I think loads of us want to do. But what I've started to do is I've forced myself now. I have a rule. I have to read at least one fiction book and one non-fiction book a month. And by now actually sort of scheduling it for myself, I find that I'm really starting to churn through a lot more books. Right, my next thing I've started to do, you might think this is a bit weird, is to do 100 press-ups. I found this website, I've written about it on my blog now, where it claimed that it could go to teach you from however rubbish you are to being able to do 100 press-ups. And I thought, wow, 100 press-ups, that sounds pretty heroic, I want to do that. And day one, all you have to do is 2 press-ups. And then several weeks later, you're doing 100. So partly it's about doing the press-ups, but partly it's an example of doing something small, where it's like setting a ridiculous challenge, and then to get to it, all it is a little by little by little, and then eventually you've done 100 press-ups and you feel like a Superman. Now, normally when I boil the kettle at home, I do what normal people do when I'm boiling the kettle, which is get down, do as many press-ups as I can before the kettle boils. Similarly, when I put my bread in the toaster and press go, I always see how many sit-ups I can do before the toaster pops. And my espresso machine in the kitchen, when I press go on that, I can do 10 pull-ups on my pull-up bar before the cup fills up. So that's what I used to do. But I've now come up with this other thing, which I find much harder, but probably more useful, which is now when I press go on the kettle, I have to sit down on my chair, close my eyes, not move, and just pause. And try to let my mind go blank. Of course, it's so hard, but I've really come to relish now this brief pinprick of calm in my days, and it really helps to sort of filter the brain a little bit. But of course, this is all just for me, and it's about the thought processes behind them rather than things itself. So I really just encourage you really just to make your own list on this note. And I think everything I've been saying can be just boiled down to two simple sentences, which does beg the question why I didn't just say those two. Set yourself an outrageous goal and then take the first tiny, tiny little step towards accomplishing it. That's all it's about. Thank you very much for listening to me.